Okay, let's start by talking about democratization. So here we have a picture of Syngman Rhee, the first president of South Korea, with Douglas MacArthur. Syngman Rhee was elected president in 1948 and he remained president until 1960. He won election 4 times. His presidency saw the first constitution written, so it's called the First Republic. His administration, his years were marked by division between North and South, the Korean War, and the Cold War. One of the things about him is that he instituted the national security law. And this gives a very broad and big definition of what it means to be seditious, so going against the government. So basically, he was able to even go after his political opponents as being anti-government because in order to campaign against him, they had to say negative things about him. The South Korean economy under Syngman Rhee was about import substitution. South Korea was very poor, and throughout the 1950s, after the Korean War, it was very much reliant on US aid. Between 1945 and 1965, South Korea received about $12 billion of US aid, which was a lot of money back then. I have there the figures for 1957 that should give you an indication of where the aid is coming from. 1960, at best, the per capita gross national product was $100 a person. So South Korea was very poor during this time. And Rhee exceeded the term limits. In fact, as I was saying earlier, he eliminated his opponents. In 1956, he had his main opponent in the election executed for treason, and that's because of the national security law that made that possible. His 1960 opponent also died mysteriously before the election. And they used to have separate elections for the vice president. It wasn't like a running mate, and they were openly practicing ballot stuffing. So in April of 1960, there was a student revolution. The Syngman Rhee government used military force against the civilian protesters. On April 12th, they discovered the body of a 17-year-old who had been killed during the protests. And so students rose up on April 19th. And more than 100 students were killed, more than 1,000 injured. And at one point, the martial law commander put down his arms and refused to fire on the demonstrators. Syngman Rhee lost support of the US government, and this led to his resignation on April 29th. These are the civilian protesters facing the martial law troops. And here we have Syngman Rhee leaving with his wife and their dog for exile in Hawaii. Can somebody who's not muted tell me anything you notice about Mrs. Rhee?
She doesn't look Korean.
Yep, she's not. She was Austrian. Okay, so after the student revolution, there were hopes for democratization in South Korea. They instituted a new constitution, this was called the Second Republic, and they decided that the president would really only be a figurehead, and it would be the prime minister who had the real power. So Changmyeon became the prime minister, and they also instituted direct elections for the governors of the provinces and the mayor of Seoul. So this was a big new thing. That's Changmyeon. He was also known as John Chang because he had spent some of the or his earlier years living in the United States. So with this newfound democratization came many student demonstrations in May of 1961. They wanted immediate reunification between the two Koreas, and people who were critical of the students said that the party as well as the government showed weakness, and people also became disenchanted with this idea of all this democratization. And there was a lot of economic uncertainty in South Korea. So on May 16th of 1961, Park Chung-hee, a general, staged a coup, and he emphasized the need for anti-communist vigilance. So again, this is the Cold War. So Park Chung-hee staged a coup. the Prime Minister, Chang Myeon, asked the United States for assistance. US declined to intervene, and Park Chung-hee ruled through a junta that he called the Supreme Council for National Reconstruction. In 1963, under strong pressure from John F. Kennedy, he ran for president. He won. He also won again in 67 and 71. And in 72, he had what is sometimes called a coup in office. He wrote a new constitution, basically making himself president for life. So the Third Republic was the third constitution in 1963, and the Fourth Republic was the fourth constitution in 72, by which the sitting president became head of the electoral body that chose the new president or the next president, which basically made him president for life. So here are two different pictures of Park Chung-hee. And some of the key things that happened under Park Chung-hee: the 1965 ROK being Republic of Korea, Japan Normalization Treaty that normalized and restored diplomatic relations between Korea and Japan. This was quite unpopular among some people, but again, it had US backing, and this brought in about $800 million to South Korea and a real economic boost for South Korea. And companies like POSCO, Pohang Iron and Steel got started at this time. So there were some people who opposed this, but it went through. Here we see the signing ceremony for the normalization treaty, and also was the Brown Memorandum that I spoke about in the last hour. This brought about $1 billion in aid. About 300,000 South Korean soldiers went to Vietnam, and also helped many businesses get started at this time. We saw this picture before. So under Park Chung-hee, we saw these 5-year economic plans. The focus was no longer on import substitution, but on export-oriented industrialization. There was the government backing of Set Chaebol, which are these family-controlled conglomerates, which today you know of companies like Hyundai and Samsung. And there was also a focus on heavy industry, such as shipbuilding, auto manufacturing, and construction. And they set up these special economic zones to focus on export-oriented economic development. And Park Chung-hee also put a lot of money into infrastructure, building roads and improving also the rural areas. And throughout this, labor really was suppressed because the government said the workers needed to make sacrifices in order for the whole country to develop. So as I said earlier, Park Chung-hee was elected multiple times. And the coup in office in 72, that's called the Yushin Constitution, marking the Fourth Republic. And basically, he became president for life after that. The name of the electoral body that the incumbent president controlled was called the National Council for Unification. You know, these are just big names. I don't really mean what it sounds like. The First Lady was assassinated in 1974, and Park Chung-hee himself was assassinated in 1979. And after that, there was more, there was nostalgia for Park Chung-hee. So here on the left, we have a picture of the Park family. The oldest daughter standing there is Park Geunhye, who was the previous president of South Korea. And that's a picture of his wife, was assassinated in 1974. After Park Chung-hee's death, people were optimistic that there was, again, a chance for democratization. So they, throughout the Yushin Constitution, they wrote a new constitution, the fifth one. So this was called the Fifth Republic, and Choi Kyu-ha became president. However, shortly thereafter, there was a coup by another general, Chun DooHwan. And that's a picture of him there. So although he took control in a coup, he didn't become president until 1980. There was also the Gwangju democratization movement in the city of Gwangju. It started out on May 18th with a small number of protesters gathering at Jeonnam National University, but Chun DooHwan said this was a North Korean communist plot, sent in paratroopers who committed a lot of violence against civilians. There was massacre of the civilians. The citizens managed to commandeer the city by getting weapons from the armory, and the military blockaded the city, and the people of Gwangju asked for US aid. They were again denied aid, and the protesters were put down May 26 into 27. So at one point, people thought the civilian deaths were much higher. Right now, it's believed to be about 230 civilians who were killed. The US is considered to have been partly responsible because the paratroopers who were sent to Gwangju were supposed to get permission from the US Armed Forces. However, the US said, no, they were informed of it, but they really didn't get to decide whether they could or couldn't go. We had the massacre of the civilians, and as a result, many protesters became more radicalized after this, believing that peaceful protests were effective, and the rise of anti-American sentiment among some of the people wanting democratization. So you have some of the pictures from Gwangju here. In terms of movies, there's a couple that I'd recommend. This is called Taxi Driver. This was from or set in this time period with Bong Joon-ho. He's the second from the left, if you recognize him from from Parasite. Also, another movie that I'd recommend that highlights South Korea and history a lot is Ode to My Father. I believe both of these might be on Netflix. Okay, so then we have the Fifth Republic with Chun DooHwan. He said he would only have a single term beginning 1980. He wasn't as popular as Park Chung-hee, and Chun DooHwan continued many of the heavy human rights abuses. Politicians, government officials, business leaders being sent to these re-education camps, as well as journalists, students, teachers, labor organizers. The South Korean economy continued to develop, especially in terms of construction firms, taking on large projects abroad, and the auto industry. So although people of Gwangju had asked the United States for help because America is supposed to be about democracy, instead, Chun DooHwan became the very first foreign leader to visit the Reagan White House, and we have pictures of that here. Okay, so Chun DooHwan announced that he would not run for a second term, and in mid-1987 was the campaign season. TaeWoo, who was Chun DooHwan's handpicked successor, put forth this June proclamation. It was 8-point reforms where he said he advocated for direct presidential elections and easing up of controls, and that that if these terms weren't accepted, that Roh Tae-woo would step down from running for the presidency. So December 1987 saw the first direct presidential election since 1971. It was split 3 ways, and Roh Tae-woo won, but without a majority of the vote because it was split 3 ways. This led to the establishment of the Sixth Republic, so the Sixth Constitution. But basically, it was more of the Chun regime with the same national security law still on the books. But the world's attention was on South Korea with the 1988 Seoul Olympics coming. This is Roh Tae-woo. But this was an important moment for democratization. Some people said democratization is a natural outcome of economic growth. And as South Korea became an economic success story, that South Korea inevitably democratized. But we also see the long-term struggle by students, intellectuals, workers. But what really culminated in 1987 was the support of religious groups. Buddhist temples, Christian churches, both the Catholic Church and Protestant churches, even shamans. There was a lot of mass support for democratization in 1987, including by the middle class and women's groups. Here we see some students protest. This was a political rally for Kim Dae Jung, one of the um, candidates for presidency in 1987. And you can see how people were just really out in force because this was the first direct presidential election since 1971. Kim Youngsam was the next president after that. Kim Youngsam was elected in 1992 with the full support of the outgoing president, and this marked the very first truly civilian president since 1963. So Park Chung-hee had staged a coup. He was a general, and same for Chun DooHwan. So Kim Youngsam was a was first civilian, not counting the Che Gyuha presidency 79 to 1980. Kim Youngsam ran on an anti-corruption platform and also promised more civilian control over the military. Kim Youngsam also put Chun DooHwan and Roh Tae-woo, the two previous presidents, on trial. In 1994, they were found guilty of engineering the coup, but their sentences were commuted. In 96, there was a second trial that found them guilty of bribery, insurrection, and treason. They were both sentenced but pardoned in 1998 by Kim Dae Jung. And Kim Youngsam's presidency was marked at the end by the IMF bailout. These are, that's Roh Tae-woo on the left and Chun DooHwan on the right in their prison garb. So when Kim Dae Jung became president in 98, this marked truly full democratization because it was the first time that an opposition leader had won the presidency. He'd been running for president for a long time. He ran in 71 and is said to have had 36% of the popular vote, even by what Park Chung-hee had alleged or had conceded. 1971, Kim Dae Jung was run over by a truck on purpose, by government operatives. He walked with a limp for the rest of his life. In 73, he was kidnapped and kept under house arrest until 79. He was indicted for inciting the Gwangju uprising, even though he had been jailed before the Gwangju uprising. He, at one point, was taken out to sea to be dumped into the ocean, but American intervention stopped that. He was exiled to the United States in 82. He returned in 85 and was under house arrest. But his presidency marked full democratization for South Korea. And as he had promised for decades, he reached out to North Korea, engaged with North Korea. Here we have the first North-South summit. And for that, he won the Nobel Peace Prize in 2000. Kim Dae Jung, his concern was economic recovery because the election came just as the IMF crisis was taking hold. So economic recovery, financial reforms were his immediate concern, and then he turned to the sunshine policy of engagement. Kim Dae Jung's election win also marked the end of the old regional discrimination because he was from the Southwest, which had not seen a president be elected from that region before. He reached out to North Korea, and so there was a lot of inter-Korea economic cooperation, including the Kaesong Industrial Complex or region. It's just 6 miles north of the DMZ. It was established in 2002, opened in 2004. It has been closed. I don't know when it might reopen. Under under Kim Dae Jung, we also saw more family reunions and opening of the Kumgangsan tourism area that was opened by Hyundai. There was also a lot of humanitarian aid to North Korea. This is a picture of the Kaesong Industrial Zone, which is now closed. And then we have Roh Moo-yeon as the next president in 2003. He was a Kim Dae Jung supporter as well as a self-educated lawyer. In Korea, you were able to sit for the bar exam without going to law school, and he had done that, which is very difficult. In March of 2004, in the middle of his presidency, he was impeached by the National Assembly for illegal electioneering and incompetence. The constitutional courts reversed that or overturned that. Now, illegal electioneering means that in Korea, a sitting president cannot campaign for his party, which he did. He also had a second North-South summit at the end of his presidency, and after his presidency, he committed suicide when he and his family and aides were under investigation. Now, in South Korea, that suicide isn't an admission of guilt; it's rather a sign, a symbol of protest. Okay, so we have Nomuyan with Kim Jong-il here. Kim Jong-il is rather ill and, as you can see, not looking that well there. And then we have Lee Myungbak as the next president, 2008 to 2013. He'd been a former businessman, member of the National Assembly, and also mayor of Seoul. There were allegations that he was infringing on freedoms of speech, press, that he was promoting Christian policies. His economic policies tended to favor businesses and the rich. It was called MBnomics because of his initials. Also during this time was a worldwide recession, and people said South Korea was the first major country to bounce back from the recession, and he was credited with that. Also free trade agreements with the United States and the European Union happened during this time. Now, there were also a lot of these candlelight protests during Lee Myung-bak's administration. And this one was at face value about US beef imports during the whole mad cow disease period. However, people said it's obviously not about that. It was really more about the civilians wanting change. Then we have Park Geun-hye. She was the oldest child of former President Park Chung-hee, and here she was president from 2013 to 2017. Some people called her South Korea's Iron Lady, likening her to Margaret Thatcher. She is like her predecessor from the more conservative party, and we saw the conflict with North Korea escalate. The Kaesong industrial complex was closed down. There was also the Sewol ferry disaster, where many of those who drowned were middle school children, and something known as Chaesun-sil Gate because of her close friend and confidant Chaesun-sil, who was also implicated. So Park Geun-hye was impeached in 2016 and removed from office in 2017. And Moon Jae-in won a special election in 2017. He's been dealing with a lot of foreign relations. He's had summits with North Korea, but things again are really difficult right now. You may have heard on the news about how North Korea destroyed a liaison office in North Korea. In terms of US, there's been also issues about that. The high altitude air defense system, about the US forces, because President Trump has said he wants South Korea to pay for more of the upkeep of American troops in South Korea, as well as trade issues. Problems with China as well, also concerning trade, same thing with Japan. And most recently, Moon Jae-in saw what appears to have been a effective dealing with the COVID-19 crisis, for which many countries applauded South Korea's responses. And on April 15th of 2020, they had National Assembly elections, and Moon Jae-in's party won a supermajority in that election. And there was Moon Jae-in there. This is a picture at a subway station about the COVID-19 crisis. Okay. Do we have a poll?
Yes. All right. So this is our first poll of this section.
while people fill that out, I'm going to look through some of the comments. Oh, I see people are answering questions, so, okay. Okay. I see a lot of comments about taxi driver and ode to my father. I'm going to address the last question. Can you explain that? So that is the terminal high altitude air defense system that South Korea put up in South Korea. And this is to strike down missiles that North Korea might launch against the United States. And China protested this because China said that this would be infringing upon Chinese sovereignty as well. And that this might also be used against China, but basically they're like Patriot missiles that would shoot down any missiles that North Korea sent. So it's not to defend South Korea as much as to help the United States. Okay, so question 1, what did the 1960 student revolution accomplish? 55% said Syngman Rhee resigned from office. Somebody said some people said first direct presidential election. Actually, they had direct elections throughout the Syngman Rhee administration. So B is correct. What did the 1980 Gwangju democratization movement accomplish? 59% said direct presidential elections. Didn't happen until 87. A, are we missing D here?
In the original document, there was no D.
Oh no.
I'll check back.
Okay. Uh-oh, I think that was a mistake. Very likely my part, but yeah. Yeah, it didn't accomplish any of these, so I think it was supposed to be D. So, oh, can't see the results. Okay, I'm gonna end it. Share the results. Yeah, I'm missing D. That's the correct answer for the second question. Okay, I'm gonna move ahead with this. Okay, so now I'm gonna talk more specifically about South Korean economic development. Some of the legacies of the colonial period is that there was a strong state and a relatively weak civil society. Hold on, can't see my screen. We also had the continued industrialization and commercialization from the colonial period. And then after the Korean War, as I said before, there was the import substitution, reliance on American aid. And then in 1965, they followed the Japanese model of economic development. There was a lot of Japanese aid, financial aid that came into South Korea, and people also focused on export oriented industrialization, and like in Japan, this close relationship between the government, the banks, and the TaeWoo, or the companies. With the Vietnam War, saw South Korea. I need to close that out. I have a lot of things on my screen. We saw the Korean companies, Korean government benefit from being contractors. Okay. Park Chung-hee era, again, the export-oriented industrialization, growth of heavy industries, the special economic zones, focus on infrastructure, building roads, also developing the rural areas and suppressing labor to keep wages low. Okay, this is the Chunghee area. As you can see, the houses on this stretch were pretty much just shacks, somehow managing to stay up on those beams. Oops, show you the next picture. And then we saw that in this stretch, you see some of the larger houses in the back, but it's still the same stream that ran through downtown Seoul. Here you see the stream was drained, and then you see the pilings going up. Another stretch of the same area, you see the concrete pilings going up, but the houses, again, very poor, very run down. And then saw this this elevated roadway and running through downtown Seoul. And then under Myungbak's uh, mayoral leadership, Chunghee became restored. Now, they could not restore it to the original stream because it had pretty much been destroyed, but it was made into a new urban park. You see many, many people there day and night. But I think this really shows South Korea's economic development from the early pictures to what it is now. So a little bit about the IMF crisis, which began in 1997. The banking sector was showing severe weakness because of bad loans. And a lot of the problems came from the fact that the government told the banks which conglomerates to lend money to. And that this close matrix between the three led to some poor economic decisions. There was a lot of debts and shortage of foreign currency reserves. And when South Korea wasn't able to repay the international loans, their revolving credit was revoked, the stock markets plunged, and the IMF bailed out South Korea, lending $58 billion, which was repaid in 2001, 3 years ahead of schedule. And then, as I mentioned a little while ago, South Korea had globalized as a result of the Asian financial crisis. So they were able to weather the 2008 global recession much easier. Some people said this is because Lee Myungbak was the CEO president and knew how to had his business experience. So South Korea is said to have been the first to recover. Now, South Korea today, as Ernest Lee had also said, is an economic success story. It is the 12th largest economy today. The GDP is 1.63 trillion as of last year. Per capita, it's at 43,000 and change. It is the #1 mobile phone manufacturer in the world, the #1 shipbuilder in gross tonnage, not in total number of ships, but in terms of gross tonnage. It's the second largest manufacturer of semiconductor chips, the 5th largest auto manufacturer in the world. It's huge in steel and construction, as well as entertainment, as you know. There's a Samsung phone. I don't think it's the newest one. Actually, I should have used the new BTS Samsung phone, which looks really cool. This is a Hyundai SUV. You see here, I don't know which was more famous or more, the then UN Secretary General Ban Ki-moon or Psy. And then here, I'm sure many of you saw Parasite, which Koreans were very proud of, that it won so many international awards. Here's BTS. And this particular photo, they are actually at the United Nations where they address the General Assembly, because not only are they amazing entertainers and dancers, their songs have a real message, whether it's against bullying, about this is based on their love yourself message. Also in South Korea, this might look like a rock concert till you look closely at the 5 people on the screen. They are, and does anybody know what this is?
Esports.
Esports.
Yes, These are video gamers. They have fans just like BTS. Not as many as BTS, but a bunch. Here I have an illustration of the Korean wave. And this is how infectious it is, or contagious even. So people often start out watching Korean dramas. Maybe you're flipping through, or you see something on Netflix, or maybe you like K-pop. But then, you immediately start wanting to know more. And then perhaps you watch Korean films, you play Korean video games, and then you get interested in Korean food and cosmetics. And from there, many people say, well, they want to learn the Korean language. And perhaps they're interested in Korean fashion, which is not really big in America, but it is in Asia. And people ultimately want to go to Korea for themselves. So the Korean wave really propagates outward like this. This is an old ad for Sephora, because K-beauty became very big as well. Okay, and that is the end of my, oh wait, we have another poll.
All right, I'll launch the last poll.
Okay, I'm gonna move ahead to the questions. So question number 1, what were factors in South Korea's economic development in the 1980s? A, South Korea's role in the Vietnam War. B, focus on import substitution. C, normalization treaty with Japan. And D, all of the above. The correct answer is D, all of the above. And question number 2, in which sectors is South Korea a top manufacturer today? So I said a top, not the top. So the correct answer is all of the above. Cell phones, ships, cars, all of them. So all of the above. So I'm going to end that poll, share the results, and saw that. Okay, I'm going to stop sharing my screen, and let's go back to gallery view. So, okay, so I'm going to address some of the comments here. And Ginny, if you could, oh wait, you don't see a D? I'll have to go figure that out then. Debbie said, I heard BTS donated $1 million to Black Lives Matter. Is that true? Yes, that's what I heard too. And that K-pop fans have been doing a lot to support progressive politics in the US. Yes, apparently that is true. Where and by K-pop fans, I don't mean K-pop fans in Korea, but the large number of K-pop fans here in the United States. Apparently they reserved a lot of tickets to the Tulsa rally, and never intending to go, they just reserved them so that there'd be all these empty, and if you've seen the pictures, the empty blue seats in Tulsa were really telling. And then Josie says, you have a question for number 1. Wasn't that an export-driven economic plan, not an import-oriented? Oh, did I say that? Hold on. I don't remember what the poll was. Oh, gosh, you're right. I was supposed to say focus on export-oriented. You're right. I messed up on B. I said the wrong thing. Thank you for catching that, Josie. What else? So any other questions? Let's talk about the economy, about democratization. Oh, I see Debbie had also said, how much influence does the US have in the politics of South Korea? I would say that really varies by the time period. More so at certain times. I mean, certainly Syngman Rhee stepped down because the United States said, hey, you don't seem to have much support. And then they offered him safe passage and exile in Hawaii, where he'd lived decades earlier. Other times that, the United States was more concerned with the Cold War rather than promoting democratization in South Korea. So it really varied. Nicole's question is, how large is government direct role in Hallyu. Um, I would say they don't have a direct role. I mean, certainly, there are rumors like, oh, the South Korean government is paying people to open restaurants abroad. No, they're not doing that, but they're certainly putting in effort to try to promote Korean culture. Like, for example, there are a lot, the Korean language is taught in many, many different countries around the world, and that is done um, with some South Korean government assistance. Other things, so they don't directly fund, let's say, BTS, but they do make, they do use funds to help promote Korean culture abroad. So more of an indirect role, I'd say, rather than a direct role. Okay, and then Judy's question is, can you explain more what I said earlier, suicide as protest, not suicide as shame? So when Roh Moo-hyun was being investigated by the next president, Roh Moo-hyun committed suicide as a way of kind of protesting the investigations. And immediately the next administration then ended the investigation. So it's suicide in East Asia kind of has a different connotation. Like you might be familiar with, like, for example, the samurai, seppuku, or, the ritual suicide. So it's seen as more, in America, we tend to look at suicide as something that people do, perhaps they're depressed or they're, it's out of despair. In East Asia, suicide is also done as a form of, like, to make a statement. So that's what I mean by it's different, which is not to say that there aren't people who commit suicide due to depression in South Korea, but there's also a different reason for it as well. And like I remember several years ago, it was during, I think, the Asian financial crisis, where a woman was so deeply in debt, she committed murder-suicide with her young children. And that was seen as an indictment on South Korean society, where we're not helping people, that people feel so much despair that they commit suicide. So in situations like that, people don't just say, oh, this woman was having problems. People say, okay, what are we doing wrong as a society? Other questions? We've got 15 minutes. How does the government influence use of masks in Korea as a way to combat COVID-19? So even before COVID-19, people in Korea often wore masks. Like you'd see people, especially in the winter during flu season, people wearing masks on the subway, in public, and that's become even more prevalent with the coronavirus. In Korea, like, for example, people were allowed to buy 2 masks per week, but these were the N95 level masks. So people were allowed to get 2 a week. The price was set by the government. People went in depending on their ID number certain days of the week, so they were allowed to buy this. But yeah, it's just, readily available cloth masks and non-N95 masks. There's no limit on, so people often wear these. And people in South Korea didn't really shut down society as a whole. They managed to do a lot of testing and contact tracing to keep this at bay. They are having a resurgence right now as well, so they immediately, had shut down things some more. So it wasn't a general shutdown, but they shut down, like, schools. What I heard from my niece was that her company didn't want large numbers of people working, so they divided people up and rented out new facilities, and also rented out parking facilities so that people could drive to work instead of taking public transportation. My friend's daughter lives in Seoul, and every day she posts on Instagram another restaurant she goes to. So she, it looks like there's a lot of social distancing, but she is out and about with her boyfriend every day.
Jennifer,
Yeah.
use of mask in Korea. The Korea has a problem with the yellow dust that is blown from China in spring for many years. So it is a very fine particle and it is extremely irritating to eyes and respiratory tract. So they've been using masks for a long time. It's very common. I don't think it was due to prevent the influenza. It was due to the yellow mask. But at the beginning of pandemic, the government, the agency, what is the agency that work on prevention of infectious disease, they emphasize use of mask because they had MERS, Middle Eastern Respiratory Syndrome, that was about 10 years ago. And that's when they learned that use of mask was helpful. So from the very beginning, they emphasized that they have to use mask. And initially they had a big problem with a shortage of masks. But the people accepted very well. They wanted to use mask and there was a shortage, but I haven't heard any Koreans, they say they don't want to use mask. And that is it's not clear. They say it's a cultural difference between Americans and Koreans and other Asian countries. Other Asian countries, they readily accepted use of mask, and every country, Singapore, Vietnam, or all these countries, Taiwan, they emphasize the use of mask, and people did not object. Nobody objected.
Yeah. And Dr. Park, by the way, is an MD. So she knows her medicine and her science.
No, actually, from experience with influenza, we didn't think that use of mask will protect. We think more it's like to prevent the spread of virus from infected people. And Americans, they want to do what it protects them, but not necessarily they do things to protect others. And that is another factor that in Korea, the Koreans have a strong feeling of the helping others. So from the very beginning of this coronavirus thing, there were a lot of volunteers, not only healthcare professionals, but even the general public. They volunteer to go and take care of that patients. And they say, if I wear a mask and it prevents others getting sick, and they're willing to do that. But here, it looks like there are a lot of people that, okay, I don't care whether I protect others. I will do only if it protects me, that kind of mentality. So some of my American friends, they say, oh, that's so strange. They're willing to do some inconvenient things to protect others. But that's what I see in Korean public.
Yeah, I think, in Korea, it's about, containing, you do this as a courtesy to other people. Let's see, I see a few comments. Josie commented to Nicole's question. Yeah, so again, I would say, I guess it really depends on how you define direct government role in promoting the Korean wave. My feeling is, they do things like, for example, the South Korean government has promoted a lot of, um, awareness about Korean food and trying to have, set spellings for things like, bulgogi, so, and what that entails. So they've done things, but by direct, I would think that that means that, they're actually opening up restaurants or paying people to open restaurants. So I'm defining direct differently. So in my mind, what they're doing is indirect to promote Korean culture without doing it directly. Like I said, they don't fund BTS or the big companies, but they did fund things like, like a Korean concert at South by Southwest. So things like that, where it's more indirect, that kind of is like, providing the seed to grow Korean culture more. What else? U.S. Okay, so yeah, in terms of the U.S. role in terms of democracy in South Korea, it was a tough path because I mean the United States, is always supposed to be, the leader of the free world. Yet at the same time, it was also the Cold War. The United States had to balance containing communism with promoting democracy in its ally. So it was really, a balancing act that we saw this not only in South Korea, but in other countries where, for example, the United States supported less than democratic leaders in the name of, the Cold War. Let's see, 322, okay. Okay, and Josie, you're stationed at Osan, so you are in Korea. Yeah, people can't enter government buildings. Yeah, the air quality can be quite bad in Korea, as Dr. Park was saying about the yellow dust. Scandals, corruption, etc., among contemporary South Korean leaders. I would say, is that limited to South Korea? We certainly see that in the United States as well, right? U.S. adoption of Korean children. Okay. It started about the end of the Korean War, where there were children fathered by American military personnel, and the first adoption agency was the Holt Agency, and they said that the children would experience a lot of discrimination in South Korea, so they needed to be adopted abroad. Also, children who were not biracial, but also just, ethnically Korean were also adopted abroad because of, the South Korean economic situation. So many children were adopted abroad, and many of them have also gone back and found their birth parents. There, have been success stories as well as tragedies about the adoptees. Does South Korea view Hallyu as soft power? I would say yes. It certainly, like Parasite has done a lot, but not just Parasite, BTS, it's done a lot to promote South Korea around the world. Do you feel that the movie Parasite accurately reflects Korean history and introduces the negative impacts of widespread economic development? I would say somewhat. I mean, in a way, I think it really struck home with viewers, not because it's so specifically Korean, but because we do see, that it's very hard for people, like we saw the poor family in Parasite, they're living in a sub-basement. The place floods when there are the torrential rains. The rich family, lives very well. I think that kind of social disparity is visible in many different countries around the world. I also think the irony of Parasite is that the company CJ Entertainment is part of the Samsung family. They're the richest family in Korea, and they got richer from this movie about the divide between rich and poor. Korean wave is strong. Yeah, I mean, BTS is huge. So I think South Korea's biggest success recently has been in terms of the Korean wave, K-pop, K-dramas. What is that?
Forest.
Oh, okay. I'm just really confused right now, but okay. Somebody just texted my son with a screenshot of me doing this right this minute. So somebody knows him apparently. What else? Asian-born students, yep. You know, the Korean language has become big, even at high schools. I gave a lecture at a local high school here in LA. It was a Korean culture and Korean language class, and I was surprised at how many non-Korean students there were. They're not just heritage students wanting to learn Korean language. It was people who love K-pop. What else? You know, I couldn't cover everything. Another thing that I do want to say before I sign off, because you won't see me for the rest of the sessions, is that if you have any students who are doing, you know, independent projects and they need guidance, please feel free to email me, jungkim@ucla.edu. It's, I think, on the slides. I always welcome, you know, inquiries from students. I would prefer it if maybe they talk to you about the questions they're going to ask me first, but I do welcome that. Entertainment industry actually work. That's a really complicated question. I have a couple of minutes. Okay, let me say it this way. There were, in recent years, 3 major entertainment companies, SM Town, YG, and I just blanked on the third.
JYP?
Thank you, JYP. But Big Hit also hit the scene. Big Hit represents BTS, and so it was really huge that one of the non-3, you know, had BTS, and so basically they recruited people from a very young age and put them through a very rigorous training. To try to make them into idols, as they're called in Korea. Most were not successful. And it's very tough. You know, like you probably heard that BTS, all of them live together. It's not like in America where they'd all be living in separate, really rich, you know, houses in the Hollywood Hills or somewhere, or Beverly Hills. In Korea, they're all made to, you know, really be together and function together as a group. They don't make the crazy kind of money that American entertainers do. And it's much more about the group than about individual stars. But yeah, they are put through a very rigorous training. Even, you know, now they have to, even, you know, during this time when their concerts are canceled, they're still having to work very hard to, you know, not only produce new content, but also really reach out to their fans on a daily basis and make the fans feel like, you know, they're involved and that they care. Also different about the Korean entertainment is that when they're dating, it's not like in America where they can be, you know, splashed on the, you know, newspapers or across the internet saying so-and-so is dating so-and-so. In Korea, they keep it much more hush-hush because the fans want to think of BTS as all single and eligible. So we are just about at the end of my time.
Yes,
Thank you very much. It was a pleasure to see all of you on Zoom. Hopefully next year we can see some of you in person back at the Korean Cultural Center, 5505 Wilshire Boulevard in the Miracle Mile.
Thank you so much. 감사합니다. Maybe a round of applause, please, everybody, for
Thank you.
Dr. Jennifer Jung-Kim.
Thank you.
I know.